The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or another print disability that makes reading a book, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org. Your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service now presents a reading of articles and features from the Buffalo News for Sunday, January 18th. Your reader for the first hour will be Edwin J. Vieira, and for the second hour, it will be Ron Bickelman. First, a look at the weather. Cloudy and colder today with some flurries with a high of 23. Overcast tonight with a couple of snow showers and a low of 20. Starting off the work week, we'll see it's windy with periods of snow accumulating 4 to 8 inches and a storm total snowfall for 6 to 10 inches and a high of 22 and a low of 6. Tuesday, we'll see a couple of flurries, frigid as well with a high of 14 and a low of 11. Heating up a bit more on Wednesday, a bit of afternoon snow with a high of 31 and a low of 20. Morning snow to continue into Thursday with a high of 23 and a low of 10. Cold and a bit of afternoon snow on Friday with a high of 20 and a low of 6. Saturday, you better break out the heaters. It'll be frigid, that's putting it mildly, with a little snow with a high of 9 and a low of -1. And now, here's our first story. As Canada touts success with China, Trump lurks. Canadian leader Mark Carney met with China's Xi Jinping this week. The two statesmen talked. Fractured relationships began to heal, and a third man, though he wasn't in the room, nevertheless made his presence clearly known: Donald Trump. The American president, his policies, his approaches to international relations, his freewheeling and provocative statements about Canada helped inform meetings 8,000 miles away between two nations working to reestablish ties stalled for nearly a decade as they grapple with the same challenge, wondering what Washington will do next. Canada's re-engagement with China as the second longest trading partner behind the U.S. is unfolding in keeping with a term Chinese media have loved this past week: strategic autonomy. Essentially, it means that a nation like Canada, so intertwined with the United States for so long as unswerving allies, needs another pillar to hold up its international foundations, given recent speed bumps in the Washington-Ottawa relationship. What does such strategic autonomy look like? For Canada, it means a trading partner with whom Carney acknowledges differences in culture and, quote, ways of life, terms he's invoked when asked about China's approach to human rights. That's one way of saying that ties between two very different countries have political and cultural limits, particularly in terms of their views of freedom. Carney, who met with several leaders of Chinese companies in Beijing, says his government is focused on building an economy less reliant on the United States at what he calls a time of global trade disruption. The security landscape continues to change, said Carney, who departed Beijing on Saturday. We face many threats. You manage those threats through alliances. Real results, but a larger narrative. Certainly, concrete results emerged from the visit. China agreed to cut its 100% tariff on Chinese electric cars in return for lower tariffs on Canadian farm products, Carney said. He spoke of an initial annual cap of 49,000 vehicles on Chinese EV exports coming into Canada at a tariff rate of 6.1%, growing to about 70,000 over 5 years. China will reduce its total tariff on canola seeds, a major Canadian export, from 84% to about 15%. The Chinese side was less specific about what came out of the meetings. As much as the deal itself, though what it represented was significant, effectively a workaround for Canada after being treated by the U.S. in the past year like it has rarely been treated before. Trump hasn't struck a deal with Canada to reduce tariffs that are upsetting the Canadian economy, and he irritated many Canadians by throwing around language saying he might consider making Canada the 51st state. Analysts from China and Canada characterized this past week's outcomes as mutually beneficial, particularly given the tenor of the times, and also politically astute, even though Carney made a point of saying the agreements are preliminary. China is succeeding in driving a small wedge between Canada and the U.S., said Nelson Wiseman, a professor emeritus of political science at the University of Toronto. China stands to gain in a number of respects. Firstly, China has nearly 2 million citizens. Canada has nearly 2 million citizens of Chinese descent living there as of 2021, in addition to many Chinese nationals who are visitors or permanent residents. The nearest major Canadian city to China, Vancouver, British Columbia, is heavily influenced with Chinese culture. That means Beijing's approach to these relations will likely be watched closer within Canadian borders. More significant, though, is this. China has increasingly styled itself as a global counterbalance to what it has long called American hegemony. This has accelerated in recent years as China's international profile and global influence rise, both because of its mammoth economy and efforts to deploy soft power through infrastructure as far off as Africa and Latin America, part of its so-called Belt and Road Initiative. But both sides want stability. China's official Xinhua news agency, in a commentary Saturday, cited the importance of ties with Canada, particularly in a time of heightened uncertainty, a euphemism that includes both nations' efforts to figure out the ins and outs of the Trump administration's fast-moving priorities. It cited economic fragmentation, geopolitical tensions, and resurgent protectionism, all challenges that both nations are dealing with when it comes to Washington. Just as noteworthy as the leader's careful language, though, was the seeming reluctance to blow past it. Xi was his usual oblique self in his comments. It can be said, quote, after meeting with Carney, that our meeting last year opened a new chapter in turning China-Canadian relations toward improvement. And Carney, clearly cognizant of the two behemoths he finds himself between, parried questions about Canada's U.S. relationship at an outdoor Beijing news conference in the freezing winter weather. While he insisted relations between Ottawa and Washington were, quote, much more multifaceted than with Beijing, Carney followed up with, but yes, the way our relationship has progressed in recent months with China is more predictable. It was unclear if he meant more predictable than before with China or more predictable than Canada's relationship with the U.S., though the reporter's question was clearly about the latter. Rapprochement can be delicate, and that was certainly the case here. Yet in world affairs and diplomacy, predictability is a prized commodity, particularly over the past decade, as Trump and other populists upend decades of post-World War II norms in international relations. My guess is that the Chinese want the opposite in Canada to what Trump wants, a coherent country with a functioning economy. And, of course, friendlier to China, where a relatively strong Canada is more desirable than not, said Robert Bothwell, a professor of Canadian history and international relations at the University of Toronto. Trump wants the opposite, a fragmented satellite that is easier to bully and extort from, Bothwell said. But Trump did, however, commend Carney for making a deal with Beijing. That's what he should be doing, and it's a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. If you can get a deal with China, you should do that. Tariffs aside, what long-term impacts Carney's visit will have in both Canada and China remains unclear. Trump has been known to switch gears, and tomorrow's Washington could be sending a very different message to Canada than today's. For the moment, though, when it comes to China's government, Xi now has stronger friends in North America than it did a week ago. And for Beijing, in all this global uncertainty, that might be more than enough. And now, Trader Joe's in Clarence sacks 5-cent bag fee amid pushback. Customers embraced the Trader Joe's that opened last month on Transit Road in Clarence, the store's second location in western New York. But then some of them noticed the store was charging a nickel for each brown paper bag used. This fee is commonplace at many supermarkets, but it wasn't imposed at the Trader Joe's just 7 miles away in Amherst. A few went on social media to vent about feeling nickeled and dimed, to say it nicely, and to blame Clarence officials for the unfairness of it all. In response, Clarence Supervisor Patrick Cassillo had the town issue a formal statement denying responsibility for the 5-cent bag surcharge, and he clarified to store management that town law doesn't require stores in Clarence to levy the fee. The Clarence Trader Joe's has since bagged the fee. It was either social media activity or me stopping them that they changed their minds about charging, Cassillo told the Buffalo News. The clash in Clarence shows that the controversy over paper bag fees in New York hasn't completely gone away. Most locally based grocery store chains charge a fee for their paper bags. The fees are an attempt by stores to recoup their costs for the bags and are intended to encourage shoppers to bring their own. Its 100% has pushed more use of reusable bags, said Mark Mahoney, president of the Dash's Market chain. Like, I see all kinds of reusable bags, shapes, sizes, at our store, our competitors. I mean, I look at my house and maybe you're the same. I probably got 30 of them in my cupboard right now. The fees followed the state's plastic bag ban, which took effect in 2020. The law was meant to boost the environment by minimizing pollution from single-use plastic bags. It didn't require stores to offer paper bags in their place, but nearly all retailers did and still do so. Grocery stores were a focal point for the law's effects and for grumbling about the switchover. Most grocery stores charge a fee for paper bags for their customers. Wegmans charges 5 cents per bag, a fee the company said is meant to incentivize customers to bring their own bags to the store. In 2022, when Wegmans announced a chain-wide switch from plastic to paper, the company said communities that had previously undergone this change saw customers end up using reusable bags, or no bags at all, for about 3/4 of store transactions, and paper bags for the rest. Dash's markets have seen a shift in consumer behavior since the plastic bag ban took effect, Mahoney said. Now 95% of the store customers use their own or no bag when shopping, he said. The company, which has 4 stores in Erie County, initially didn't charge for paper bags, Mahoney said. However, the chain's small size limits its ability to negotiate a cheaper rate for items like paper bags, which Dash's sources locally, and the prices began adding up, he said. Dash's eventually decided it had to make up the cost, Mahoney said. What we do is we pay 15 cents per bag, and we charge 15 cents per bag, he said. Tops Markets charges 8 cents per paper bag, a figure that doesn't cover the company's full cost for each bag, a spokesperson said. In a few jurisdictions, such as Tompkins County, where retailers are required to charge a fee for paper bag use, a portion of the surcharge goes to state and local coffers. No Western New York municipalities have passed a law requiring stores to charge carry-out paper bag fees. In Erie County and elsewhere in the region, it's up to each store whether to do so. The Trader Joe's on Niagara Falls Boulevard in Amherst, which opened in 2013, doesn't charge customers for paper bags. Fans of the California-based grocery chain store noticed that the Clarence store, which opened its doors on December 12th, was charging a 5-cent fee. But some wondered whether the fee was the town's fault, Cassillo told the news. So he said it went to the store and spoke to its manager and assistant manager. They thought that Williamsville had a local law that they should be charging for bags, Cassillo said. I said, we're not in Williamsville. The store has a Williamsville mailing address and is identified by Trader Joe's at its Williamsville number 575 store, but it's located within the Clarence town limits. I said, this is Clarence. We do not have a local law, Cassillo said. You do not have to charge for paper bags because of us. Williamsville is not among the communities in New York that require a bag fee either. I didn't contact the village. Maybe I should have contacted Brian Culpa now that he's unemployed, Cassillo said dryly, referring to the former Amherst supervisor who left office on December 31st. Prior to Culpa's election as town supervisor, he served as Williamsville mayor. To further quell the upcharge uproar, the town of Clarence also put out a statement late last month reassuring residents it has nothing to do with the bag fees. It has come to our attention that people are saying the Clarence Town Board is responsible for the 5-cent brown paper bag fee being charged by Trader Joe's on Transit Road, the town stated on its Facebook page. That is not the case. Whether prompted by Cassillo's visit, the public statement, or for some other reason entirely, the Clarence Trader Joe's now mirrors the Amherst store in no longer charging a bag fee. A news reporter confirmed this change during a visit. The company did not respond to requests for comment. The town's statement on social media did inspire one final round of debate on the merits of bag fees. We'll let a Facebook user named Rudolph Snow, perhaps his real name, have the final say. So, he asked, bring reusable bags in, or are y'all that lazy? You're listening to a reading of today's Buffalo News on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. The time for our morning listeners is 9:13 a.m., and for our afternoon listeners, the time is 4:13 p.m. And now on to a front page feature. Ryan vows to deliver greatest good to the city, sets the agendas for environmental goals. To tackle Buffalo's lead poisoning crisis, stop sewage overflows into waterways, and grow the city's tree canopy, Mayor Sean Ryan said competent leadership is needed, something he's confident he's bringing into City Hall. Protecting Buffalonians from the city's greatest environmental challenges and improving its natural resources won't be easy, given Buffalo's budget deficit, Ryan said. But his team is prioritizing such actions as he brings a new management structure to City Hall. That's sort of what's been missing, is this commitment to the people of the city of Buffalo, he said. It's your job to spend the taxpayers' money as efficiently as possible to deliver the greatest good for the people. Somewhere, leaders in City Hall have lost sight of what their ultimate job is supposed to be. Excerpts from Ryan's interview about his environmental priorities are printed below in this story. The text has been edited for length and for clarity. How are you going to fulfill your campaign promises of getting chipping, lead paint, and contaminated soils out of Buffalo homes? You prioritize your budget. so you can pull from other departments to work on your priorities. We're working now to come up with a plan. Ultimately, we're looking for something similar to the Rochester model. They've been doing it for a generation. Nobody moves into a house in Rochester with children that hasn't been inspected by the city at some point. This has been an acute, consistent problem in Buffalo that we're going to fix. During summer of 2024, reporting found that on hot summer days, some areas, particularly those on the east side, tend to be about 3 to 6 degrees hotter than areas with a heavy tree canopy. While the previous administration received $8 million to help improve tree canopy equity across Buffalo, much of those funds went unspent. Do you see tree equity as an issue in Buffalo? And if so, how do you plan to address it? Ryan's answer: trees are an environmental equity problem. They're a symptom of our racial inequities. You conquer disinvestment by reinvesting. One of the things we're going to do is figure out how much of that federal money is still left. New York State has grants available each year for tree planting, but it'll be a priority by my administration to do canopy restoration. We're also going to bring a stronger forestry team to maintain our current tree stock. In the last 2 decades, the city has really pulled out of the urban forestry business, so we're going to get back into it. At some point, the process became so convoluted that no trees were planted. The trees are planted for the public good. It's a public policy. In an air pollution study of the city of Buffalo, the State Department of Environmental Conservation found that many areas of Buffalo continue to suffer from harmful air pollution, particularly in areas where there's a lot of car traffic. As mayor, how will you propose solutions to the traffic problems of Buffalo? To the pollution problems of Buffalo as well. It's no mystery that if you live along I-90, I-190, or Route 33, you probably have lesser air quality. So we have to look at ways that we have reduced that. One of the ways we're considering this is downsizing or downgrading roads from highways to parkways and boulevards. Is that something you'd propose? We have to look at it. When the speed limit on the Skidjackwada Expressway went from 50 miles per hour to 30, over half the cars disappeared. That reduced noise pollution, but the cars dissipated throughout the neighborhoods. Trying to figure out traffic and pollution, it can be tricky because if you pull cars off one street, does that cause air quality to be bad on other streets? In September, the Buffalo Sewer Authority entered into a new agreement with the DEC, giving it until 2040 to implement upgrades to its system and stop the sewage overflows into our waterways. This was an extension of its previous deadline of 2034. How do you plan to restore trust that the upgrades will happen on time? Generally, the consent decrees are, you have to do this much to not be sued. So that's not how we're going to look at this. We're going to look at this as, how can we stop as much sewage overflow as possible? It's not going to be our goal to merely comply with the consent decree, but how do we make it so our waterways are swimmable, drinkable, and fishable? That's the goal. And how can you ensure that's going to happen? If you make it a priority and push resources toward it, then goals are accomplished. We have to set a new goalpost, and that new goalpost has to be what we want to swim in the city of Buffalo. We want Buffalo kids to take swimming lessons at the Outer Harbor in the lake. Do you plan any kind of changes at the Buffalo Sewer Authority to accomplish this? We're going to take a broad look at the Sewer Authority. We're going to look at who's on board and who's the leadership team there. One thing is for sure, we're going to have the Sewer Authority prioritize stopping sewage overflow, not just merely complying with the consent decree. New York State has more money than ever available for cities to deal with the stormwater runoff problem, and Buffalo has not fully availed itself to that mostly free money, and that's a mistake. Buffalo's curbside recycling program has struggled to reach its goal of diverting 34% of material from the landfill. How do you aim to improve the program to meet its goals? The whole trash system is a mess. We have no set rules. The solid waste fund's out of balance. The user fee does not pay for the pickup. They owe the city millions of dollars. And there's no clear guidance to the people about what's recyclable. We'll come up with more robust public education guidelines for people to follow. And the economics of recycling are changing constantly, so you don't want to get wrapped up into too much of a long-term contract on that. So we have to really look at it. Another climate change impact in the city is rising heat. While the city hasn't yet hit 100 degrees, according to the National Weather Service, that day may soon come as global temperatures rise. One way to help residents and homeowners stay safe in extreme heat and extreme cold is by weatherizing homes and ensuring energy is affordable. How do you plan on ensuring residents are able to make these upgrades without breaking the bank? When I was a state senator, I worked very hard on pieces of legislation that have yet to pass. It's an insulation program to insulate homes of people throughout the city of Buffalo, and our proposal is to make insulation rate-based, where the utilities will be responsible for insulating homes, and that cost of the insulation will be borne by all the ratepayers. It'll result in less fuel being used to heat and cool homes, and then the ratepayers eventually will save money. That's going to be one of the city's priority pieces of legislation this year, to pass the insulation bill. And now we turn to world news. Amid tears, anger, Iranians protest in Europe. Standing on an open truck making its way through Berlin, Anahita Safarzadeh turned to the crowd of Iranian protesters marching behind her and took the microphone. "No more dictatorships in Iran. The mullahs must go," she shouted. Hundreds of voices echoed her slogan with the same sense of urgency and desperation. Across Europe, thousands of exiled Iranians have taken to the streets to shout out their rage at the government of the Islamic Republic, which has cracked down on protests in their homeland, reportedly killing thousands of people. Women have taken a prominent role in organizing the protests abroad, raising their voices against the theocratic government that discriminates against them. But beyond the anger, there's also a sense of fear and paralysis. Iran's government has been shutting down the internet and limiting phone calls for days, making it nearly impossible for Iranians in the diaspora to find out if their families back home are safe. Safarzadeh, age 34, fled Iran 7 years ago. She came to Berlin to study theater, but now works in a bar where she's not attending one of the almost daily protests in the German capital. The desperation grows. Since the demonstrations broke out in Iran in late December, Safarzadeh said she's been living in two different realities that are almost impossible to combine. The easygoing hipster life of her new hometown is a jarring contrast to the bloody protests in Iran that she's been following every minute she doesn't have to work, glued to her phone for the latest updates. While she was initially almost euphoric that the current uprising would finally bring freedom to Iran and she'd be able to go back home, her sense of hope has turned to horror. Safarzadeh hasn't spoken to her brother, also a protester, since communications with Iran were cut off. She's been scouring videos on social media showing piles of dead bodies to see if he's among the corpses. "I'm desperate, and I don't know how to keep going anymore," she cried, tears rolling down her cheeks as she spoke during Wednesday's Berlin protest. "I can't really switch off. I can't really stop reading the news either," she added, her voice breaking. "Because I'm waiting all the time for the internet to be available so I can get some answers from my family, the young woman's horror is felt by many of the more than 300,000 Iranians living in Germany, one of the biggest exile communities in Europe and similar in numbers to France and Britain. Many of them still have family ties to their homeland, even if they left decades ago. But solace is important. Mehergin Maroufi's Persian cafe and bookstore in Berlin has become a place of solace for Iranians to share their grief without many words, because they know they're all living through the same nightmare. Maroufi, the daughter of the late Iranian author Abbas Maroufi, welcomes Iranians and everyone else into Hidyat Cafe, where she serves Parisian tea with sweets such as chocolate cake topped with barberries. She lends an ear to anyone who has to get worries off their chest. For some, the emotions are still too high and too strong, so to speak, and it's impossible to talk, the 44-year-old says. Adding that, she too had to force herself to open the cafe on some mornings because the violent images coming out of Iran sucked away all her energy. But at least you can find compatriots here. You can talk a little, and that helps, she said. She says she's been listening to and learning from the convictions her fellow Iranians express when they talk about the dreams of an Iran after Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei that, due to the uprising, now seems closer than ever before. Dreams of a future Iran. While most in the diaspora agree that theocracy has to be toppled, ideas of what a new Iran should look like differ widely. Adela Tavakoli, age 62, joined a demonstration outside Britain's Parliament in London earlier last week. She hasn't been back to Iran in 17 years, but has spent decades protesting from afar against the Islamic Republic. But with the latest wave of protests, she hopes the Iran's exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah ousted by the Islamic Revolution in 1979, will return to power. If he does, she said, she has her bags packed and is ready to get on the first flight. For 47 years, our country has been captured by a terrorist regime, she said. We've been the voice of Iran. All we want is our freedom and to get rid of this horrible dictatorship. For Maral Salmasi, who came to Germany as a child in the 80s, history explains that calls by exiled Iranians for Pahlavi to lead to the country. As an Iranian, as someone who comes from this culture and knows its culture and history, I can only say that we have had kings and queens for thousands of years. It is our culture, said Salmasi. She's the chairwoman and founder of the Zera Institute think tank in Berlin, which researches democracy, radicalization, and extremism. She added that Iranians make up a multi-ethnic country, and to bring them together again, we need a constitutional monarchy that symbolically and traditionally represents our identity and reunites everyone, and then a democratic federal parliament where everyone is represented equally. However, not everyone is convinced by Pahlavi. Miriam Najapour, age 32, who also joined the protest in Berlin, thinks her country should avoid a cult of personality. We don't need something like Khomeini again. We don't need one person to lead us, she said as she burnt a portrait of the Ayatollah and used the flames to light a cigarette, an act that's become a symbol of Iranian resistance. Safarnejad, who led the recent Berlin protest, agrees. I don't belong to the left. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a monarchist, she stressed. I've been there for women's rights. I'm for human rights. I'm for freedom. In Iran, a search of body bags and a roadside burial. Robina Armeni's family believes the college student was killed by a bullet fired by Iranian security forces straight into the back of her head. But her death in the nationwide protest that challenged the Islamic Republic's theocracy was only the start of the family's agony. In the aftermath of the killing, Aminian's mother had to look through piles of bloodied corpses to find her daughter's body. Then the family raced to escape authorities who might demand payment to release the body and buried her hastily in an unmarked roadside pit. Their odyssey reflects the trail of anguish left by Iran's deadly assault on protesters, which has led to desperate relatives searching overflowing morgues across the country. For families, the loss of loved ones is compounded by the difficulty they face in grieving and giving the dead a dignified send-off. More than a week after she was killed, Aminian's relatives say they still have not held a funeral for the young Kurdish woman who was studying fashion in Tehran, the capital. She wanted a bright future for herself, her uncle Nizar Minot said from Oslo, but unfortunately, the future has been stolen from her. But the details about what happened to Aminian are scant. After her death, her mother called relatives outside the country, recounting what she learned from Aminian's friends who were present when she was killed. The Associated Press spoke to 3 relatives, all of whom described similar details from the mother's account. An Oslo-based human rights organization, Iran Human Rights, released a report about her killing, citing witness testimony. They verified there was a shooting on the night of January 8th around the campus of the Sharati Technical and Vocational College for Girls. With communications greatly limited in Iran, the AP has been unable to identify independently or confirm the family's account or the wounds in Aminian's body or to verify its location. The Iranian mission to the United Nations in New York did not respond to questions about the death. The U.S.-based human rights activist news agency, which relies on a network of activists on the ground and has been accurate during previous unrest in Iran, said at least 3,090 people have been killed. Iran's government has not offered any overall casualty figures. But everything that Aminian's relatives abroad know about her death comes from a brief phone call her mother was able to make on January 10th to relatives in Oslo. They say the mother, Aminia Noreh, got a call January 8th from Aminian's friends, who said she had been gunned down by security forces. The friends told Noreh they were walking away from campus in Tehran after dark when they saw a protest and joined in. A bullet fired by security forces struck the back of Aminian's head, her friends told the mother. Videos shared on social media verified by the AP and statements by rights groups, doctors, and survivors describe Iranian agents using rifles and shotguns to disperse protesters across the country. Iran's theocracy, which has used violence in previous rounds of unrest, increasingly refers to demonstrators as terrorists. Authorities allege some demonstrators were armed. but there are no allegations that anyone was armed in Aminian's vicinity at the time of her death. Aminian's relatives said she was not an activist or involved in politics. Aminian's mother was in Kermanshah, a western city in the Kurdish region of Iran, nearly 230 miles from Tehran, when she learned about her daughter's death. She rushed to Tehran in the middle of the night, she told family. Noureh recalled to them how she began unzipping body bag after body bag looking for Aminian. She looked through so many beautiful faces trying to find her girl, Hali Noureh, Aminian's aunt said from Oslo. And what's so horrifying for me is imagining what my sister feels as she searches for her daughter. Many other Iranian families are searching overflowing morgues for loved ones, according to rights group Amnesty International. Bodies have piled up in trucks, freight containers, and warehouses, the group said. When Noureh found her daughter, she was joined by her husband, daughter, and son, and the family rushed out with the body, fearing authorities would block their way or insist on payment to release the corpse, according to Minoy, Aminian's uncle. She actually stole the body, Minoy said. In a statement to the AP, the New York City-based Center for Human Rights in Iran said it has received multiple accounts of intelligence forces demanding money for families in exchange for the return of protesters' bodies. The group called the levies a well-known standard practice in Iran to scare families into not publicly mourning their dead. Other families reported to the center that they were forced to sign papers falsely declaring that their dead relatives were members of the security forces in order to retrieve the bodies. Iranian state television recently aired a statement saying mortuary and burial services were free after repeated allegations of the practice. Minoy said that the mother told them that she and her oldest daughter spent the 7-hour ride back to Kermanshah clutching the body in the back seat, blood and tears staining their clothes. When they got home, the mother told him security forces had surrounded their home. Aminian Noureh told her father they only had one option. They drove out of town, dug a pit on the side of the road, placed the body inside, and drove away. Aminian is still believed to be buried there, in an unmarked grave. Relatives said they have not heard from Aminian Noureh or other relatives since Sunday. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Buffalo News on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. The time for our morning listeners is 9:32 a.m., and for our afternoon listeners, the time is 4:32 p.m. And now we turn to local news. Minnesota ICE at odds on how many aliens in custody. The Trump administration has repeatedly said the surge of immigration enforcement in Minnesota is the result of sanctuary politicians who release criminal illegal aliens directly from jails onto the streets to terrorize more innocent Americans, but Minnesota officials say the state prisons work directly with ICE. Since President Trump took office, Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey have released nearly 470 criminal illegal aliens back onto the streets of Minneapolis, said U.S. Homeland Security Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin this past week, calling on the state to, quote, stop this dangerous policy and commit to honoring the ICE arrest detainers of the more than 1,360 criminal illegal aliens in Minnesota custody. The Minnesota Department of Corrections, however, said this past week that those numbers are, quote, categorically false. Of about 8,000 people incarcerated in state prisons, 207 are non-U.S. citizens, according to the DOC statement. The state's prisons notify Immigration and Customs Enforcement when someone with a detention hold is being released from custody to coordinate a pickup from immigration officials. County jails and workhouses are a different matter. State law says local law enforcement cannot hold people in custody solely based on civil immigration detainer requests from ICE, according to a legal opinion last year from Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. County boards, however, can enter into such agreements with ICE, according to another advisory opinion from Ellison. 7 of Minnesota's 87 counties have agreements with ICE. The ongoing misstatements by DHS leadership reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of how the criminal justice system operates, DOC said in a statement. Conflating local jail populations with state prison operations and confusing immigration enforcement authority with correctional custody misleads the public and obscures the truth. The DOC pointed out that Homeland Security hasn't specified which jurisdictions or timeframes they're using for their numbers. DHS and ICE spokespeople did not respond to requests for comment on Friday. Additionally, DHS has not identified a single instance in which the Minnesota Department of Corrections released an individual from state prison custody in violation of an ICE detainer, the statement said. Last year, 84 people with ICE detainers were released from prison, and DOC staff notified ICE in advance and coordinated with ICE officials to facilitate the custody transfer when requested. But it's not exactly the worst of the worst in state prison. According to Homeland Security, their operations target criminal illegal aliens with prior convictions for serious crimes like sexual assault, domestic violence, and gang affiliation, as well as individuals with final deportation orders. Although DHS has not released a complete list of those arrested, the agency has said in several news releases they've included, quote, pedophiles, rapists, and violent thugs who were allowed to roam Minnesota's streets thanks to sanctuary policies. DHS has highlighted some of the people they've arrested, calling them the worst of the worst and listing their charges or convictions. However, in most cases where those took place are not included. The names don't include dates of birth, making independent verification by the Pioneer Press through Minnesota and federal court record systems unreliable. Minnesota's Department of Corrections operates state prisons, not local jails. Many people who DHS recently listed are the worst of the worst were never in DOC custody and instead held in county jails, which under ICE-only custody, or were in the state's correction systems, according to the DOC. A Homeland Security news release Wednesday highlighted the case of German Adriano Yangara Inga, an undocumented immigrant from Ecuador charged in a drunken driving crash that killed 31-year-old Victoria Eileen Harwell in North Minneapolis on August 3, 2024. According to DHS, the Hennepin County Jail refused to honor 2 ICE detainers, first after his arrest and again after he was charged with criminal vehicular homicide. Court records show that Yangara Inga, age 36, was charged last May after testing on his blood alcohol content was complete and arrested 8 days later. 3 days after his arrest, he was released from the Hennepin County Jail after posting a $100,000 bond, despite, according to ICE, a second detainer placed on him. ICE arrested Yangara Inga on May 16th. Victoria Eileen Harwell's killer never should have been released from Minnesota jails, DHS's McLaughlin said in this week's news release. States go their own way after federal vaccine policies shift. New federal guidance to reduce the number of vaccines recommended for all children from 17 vaccines down to 11 comes as states are already charting their own courses on new vaccine policies. The new federal guidelines mention a directive issued by President Donald Trump in December calling to align the U.S. vaccination schedule with peer countries, such as Denmark, that recommend fewer childhood vaccines, even though those countries provide more robust government-funded health systems. At stake are requirements for attending public schools, where most states have lower vaccination rates since the pandemic, as well as insurance coverage that makes vaccines affordable. At least 17 states have announced they will disregard the new federal guidance. Many have created formal alliances to share health information. The Northeast Public Health Collaborative, composed of Connecticut, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, and New York City, announced Monday it will continue following guidance from the American Academy of Pediatrics. The science is clear. Vaccines remain the best protection for keeping children and communities healthy, the collaborative said in its announcement. The American Academy of Pediatrics held a news conference this month to denounce the changed recommendations from the Federal Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. Literally, children's health and children's lives are at stake, Dr. Sean O'Leary, chair of the association's Committee on Infectious Diseases, said on January 5th. There's no evidence that skipping or delaying certain vaccines is beneficial for U.S. children. What we do know is that whenever children go without recommended vaccinations, they're at risk for these diseases that we prevent. And governors of 14 states have formed another alliance to share public health information, including on vaccinations. The updated CDC guidance creates confusion and introduces unnecessary barriers for families who want to protect their children from serious illness, said the Governors Public Health Alliance in its January 6th news release. The governors are all Democrats, though the group says it's nonpartisan. You're listening to a reading of the Buffalo News on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. The time for our morning listeners is 9:39 a.m., and for our afternoon listeners, the time is 4:39 p.m. And now on to business news. Pricey pastimes. How to nurture an expensive hobby without going into debt. On Reddit, a user recently asked if spending money on an expensive hobby can be justified. Sure, expensive hobbies may bring joy. What if that splurge takes money away from other, more responsible goals, such as saving or paying off debt? Responses were mixed. Some encouraged the poster to spend on what makes them happy. After all, you never know what the future might bring. But others recommended a more balanced approach, suggesting a responsible split between spending on future savings and today's hobbies. It turns out financial experts think it's okay to indulge, in a balanced way, of course. Taking care of your essentials. Before splurging on non-essentials, do a review of your basic needs, suggests Andy Wren, an accredited financial counselor and founder of Coaching Capability in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. Are you covering the important stuff and still feeling good about your financial situation? It's a good idea to make sure your bills are paid and you're saving for the future before turning to hobby-related spending, Wren says. Reflect on bigger goals. What's your master plan? Thinking about your goals and values in a useful way can decide how to prioritize your discretionary funds, says John Jones, a certified financial planner and investment advisor representative at Heritage Financial in Newberry, Florida. If you have a partner, it's useful to talk about where you want to be in about 5, 10, maybe 15 years, he adds. How do you want to spend your time? How do you want to spend your financial assets? Is it on golfing, boating, or sailing? One might appeal more to one person than the other, Jones says. But build hobby spending into your budget. Once you've set your financial priorities, you can make room for your expensive hobby in your overall budget, Jones says. I like to think through what is sustainable, he says. A sustainable expense is one you can pay for with your current cash flow instead of turning to savings or loans. There might be ways to cut back in other areas to make room for the extra expense. Maybe we save $10,000 a year for this hobby, Jones suggests. Wren takes that approach in pursuit of her passions, which include travel and crafting. For me, it was important to have money in the budget to do these things that I enjoy doing, she says, which meant scaling back, spending in other categories to compensate. Find creative ways to fund your hobby. To fund her travel passion, Wren strategically uses credit cards. She pays them off each month to earn travel rewards. Done right, she can purchase airplane tickets with points instead of savings. She recently took her family on a trip to Scotland, which was paid for largely by those travel rewards. I could afford it because I planned for it, she says. Another option is to brainstorm ways to make your hobby pay for itself. If you're a crafter, you can try to sell some of your creations on Etsy. If you love to sail, maybe you can offer charters to pay for clients, Jones suggests. Embrace patience and planning. Sometimes a big hobby-related purchase requires extra planning, Wren says. For example, she spends big on craft supplies, but only stocks up during her favorite store's annual sale. For me, going to the craft store and spending $300 makes me happy, so I save for that, she says. In her case, savvy planning pays off. She used the stamps, ink, and paper all bought on sale to make her annual holiday thank you and greeting cards. Another tip, create a separate savings account for the hobby and deposit money into it each month, Wren says. That can make it easier to accrue funds for a passion while avoiding debt. This method also helps head off any potential fights with your partner about how the money is spent. If the spending is pre-planned, you don't need to fight about it, she says. Taking that approach allowed her to purchase a large sewing machine and computer to assist with crafting projects. Having a dedicated savings account that I just put money into every month makes it very purposeful and allows me to save without being tempted to spend on something else, Wren says. Most companies say tariffs have harmed their business. Most Western New York manufacturers think the Trump administration's tariffs have hurt their business. 65% of respondents say the tariffs have affected their business either somewhat or quite negatively. 16% cited no impact, while 19% said the tariffs had affected them either somewhat or very positively. More local manufacturers are passing on at least some of the tariff costs to customers, and many said they're putting off plans to hire or invest in their businesses. From how I read this survey, the purpose of the tariffs are not to achieve the goal, said Peter Ahrens, executive director of the Buffalo Niagara Manufacturing Alliance. And we have to recognize that before we take further steps, the BNMA and the Manufacturers Association of the Southern Tier conducted the survey in December as a follow-up to a survey in August. Trump announced the tariffs in April. 58 companies participated in the survey. The results illustrate how the effects vary among manufacturers. 41% said their orders were down as a result of the tariffs, compared to 45% who said so in a previous survey, but 17% said their orders were up, compared to 12% the last time. 41% reported no change in orders, a percentage that dropped slightly from the previous survey. You've got a handful doing well from the tariffs, but majority are impacted, Aaron said. Here's how the companies reported the tariffs' effects in other categories. For costs, many manufacturers are grappling with higher costs stemming from importing products from other countries. We source components from China and Taiwan, and both have increased our costs as well as our lead times to procure these components, said one unidentified company in comments submitted with the survey. Another company said its business relationship with Germany and Italy were abruptly impacted. There were previously no tariffs, and without any warning, we're now paying for tariffs of anywhere between 15 and 45%. Yet another respondent lamented how Canada supplies a lot of aluminum to the United States, and the cost of that material has increased dramatically. Still, some companies stand to benefit from the tariffs, especially if they can position themselves as less expensive domestic alternatives to overseas suppliers whose products have become costlier to import. Companies impacted by the tariffs have weighed how to cope. They've used three basic approaches: absorbing those costs, passing them on to customers, or a combination of the two. The latest survey indicates most companies have started passing on at least part of the cost of the tariffs to their customers. In the new survey, 44% said they were passing along the additional cost to the customer, which was up from 35.5% in August. But 10.5% said they were absorbing the costs, up from 9% in August. The percentage of companies doing a combination of the two shrank to 46% from 55%. As for hiring, are the tariffs prompting companies to reduce or increase their hiring? Some of each is happening, according to the survey. 35% said they were decreasing hiring compared to 29% in the previous survey. 14% said they were increasing hiring compared to 8% who answered that way in August. 51% said they were not making changes compared to 63% the last time. And finally, outlook. How are manufacturers preparing for the future in light of the tariffs? Again, the outlook is mixed. When asked to choose all answers that applied to them, 39% of respondents said they'd paused capital spending, and 37% said they planned to make fewer new hires. But 31% said they were planning additional hires, and 27% were initiating new capital expenditures. The survey results indicate many companies are putting off plans to invest or add jobs in the face of the tariffs. That hurts the future because that's opportunity cost, Aaron said. And nearly 1 in 5 of the respondents said they were reevaluating the company's contribution to employee benefits as another way to respond to the tariffs' effects. The two manufacturing groups plan to conduct another survey in May, just over a year after Trump announced the tariffs, Aaron said. Apart from the survey, some Western New York manufacturers have reported the tariffs have had an effect on their operations. Moog Inc., one of the region's largest manufacturers, reported that the tariffs had an $18 million impact on its operating profits in its past fiscal year, which ended in late September. Even with the effect, the Elma-based aerospace company reported record-high sales in its fiscal fourth quarter and its fiscal year. Graham Corp, based in Batavia, had estimated the tariffs will have an impact in the range of $2 to $4 million in its current fiscal year, which concludes at the end of March. As part of our newspaper reading, we now present the day's death listings. If you need further information on any of these names, please call us at 716-821-5555. That number again is 716-821-5555. Michael W. Adamski, Jr., Sr., Joseph Asheri, Richard F. Dick Ayers, Theodore Ted E. Backus, Lucia Helen Baker, Mark Bergio, Cheryl Lee Bergwart Nee Booth, Mary A. Consiglio, Valerie Comstock Cooley, EDD, Kevin S. Croft, Estelle A. Croglio, Nee Rizzo, Edward Sonny Lewis David, Teresa Marie Ducat, nee Hermel. Phyllis A. Drozd, nee Joswiak. John J. Dugan, Ph.D. John T. Ernst. Barbara Fernandez, nee Basti. Edith M. Flanagan. James E. Fox. David A. Geeter. Nina R. Griffin. Elaine W. Harris, nee Wistron. Timothy M. Hayes. June Henneberger, nee Sayer. Carol A. Hillman, nee Schlau. Andrea Gale Hoffauer. George A. Holmes. Paul J. Charlie Keller. Diane J. Kleinfelder, nee Cruiser. Richard S. Krause, M.D. Rebecca I. Krause, nee Blisharsky. Sandra Coons. Julie Ann Lentaff Rivers. Fred J. Lindner. Mary Loksinski. Gordon J. Gordy Martin. Robert D. Martz. Robert Maxick. Janine M. McGorry, nee Richer. Carol A. Mickey, nee Abramnick. Ema Miller. Judith J. Morgan, nee Whitehead. Michael S. Morlock. Glenn A. Mlerch. Pamela Neese. Sharon Marie Poloni. David J. Payne. Timothy E. Penfold. Robert M. Pikuzinski Sr. Joseph J. Pinuwisky. Joanne Pyle Ristartis. Jose A. Rodriguez and Jace A. Jr. Jocelyn N. Rodriguez, nee Mercano. Albert F. Roll. Irene M. Russo, nee Ostrowski. Jeffrey A. Salmon. Bruce Shelby. Camille M. Sipple, nee Kubala. William Billy Small. Vincent Samogi. Dragika Subarak, nee Gallic. David L. Thiel. Lawrence M. Unger. Alan F. Vio. Margaret Wedgwood. Rachel A. Wheeler O'Connell. Reginald White. Matthew D. Wisorick. Edward J. Zimmerman. If you need further information on any of these names, please call us at 716-821-5555. That number again being 716-821-5555. And now for today's horoscopes, it's Royal Stars from Georgia Nichols. Happy birthday for anyone on Sunday, January 18th. You're fun-loving, enthusiastic, and imaginative. You value independent thought and your ability to explore the world. This is a more laid-back year. It's time to rest and rejuvenate your energies. The stars will show the kind of day you'll have, with 5 being dynamic, 4 is positive, 3 is average, 2 is so-so, and 1 is just difficult. For Aries, you're having a 4-star day. This might be the best day of the year to ponder your life direction because you're heading off on a new journey this year. Tonight, friendships. For Taurus, a 4-star day, this is the classic day to develop a crush on your boss or someone older or more established. It's the time to think about education or travel that could enrich your life. Tonight, you are noticed. Gemini, a 3-star day. Today you will adore travel. You might adore someone different or someone from afar. Meanwhile, this is one of the best days of the year to think about how to handle your debt. Tonight, explore. For Cancer, a 3-star day. The new moon today is your chance to think about what you can do to improve your closest relationships. For a relationship to be successful, you must be as good for your partner as he or she is for you. Tonight, check your finances. Leo, a 4-star day. Today's new moon is the perfect time to think about how to work harder, work smarter, or find a better job. It's also your chance to give more serious thought to how to improve your health. Tonight, cooperate. For Virgo, a 4-star day. A work-related romance might warm your heart today. Meanwhile, today's new moon is your chance to think about the balance in your life between work and play. Tonight, work. Libra, a 4-star day. This is a fabulous day for romance. You will also enjoy socializing and having good times with friends, sports events, and playful activities with kids. Think about how you can improve your domestic world tonight. Today, play. Scorpio, it's a 4-star day. Today's new moon is about communication for your sign. How can you improve your everyday communication with others? Meanwhile, this is a wonderful day to entertain at home. Tonight, relax. Sagittarius, a 4-star day. Today is the perfect day to give thought to money, wealth, and how you handle your possessions. Do the things that you own benefit your life, or are they a burden to you? Tonight, discussions. For Capricorn, today the new moon is in your sign, giving you an opportunity to make resolutions or plans for what you want to achieve in the future. Tonight, check your money. Aquarius, it's a 4-star day. Today's new moon is taking place in a hidden part of your chart, which is why you might feel the need to make some internal changes. Tonight, you win. And lastly, Pisces. Today's new moon is the perfect day to make resolutions. Someone younger might influence your decisions or give you suggestions. Tonight, privacy. And for today in history, on this date, January 18th, in 1778, English navigator Captain James Cook reached the present-day Hawaiian Islands, which he dubbed the Sandwich Islands. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson asked Congress in a confidential message for $2,500 of funding for exploration of western lands all the way up to the Pacific, an early step in the eventual formation of the Lewis and Clark expedition that would ultimately accelerate American expansion westward beyond the Mississippi River. In 1911, the first landing of an aircraft on a ship took place as pilot Eugene B. Ely brought his Curtiss biplane in for safe landing on the deck of the armored cruiser USS Pennsylvania in San Francisco Harbor. In 1958, Canadian Willie O'Ree became the first black hockey player in the National Hockey League as he made his debut with the Boston Bruins. In 1977, scientists identified the bacteria responsible for the deadly form of atypical pneumonia known as Legionnaire's disease. And in 1990, Washington, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry was arrested after he was caught smoking crack cocaine in a videotaped sting. Barry spent a few months in prison, won a D.C. council seat in 1992, and then his fourth mayoral victory in 1994. And now, a brief look at the political notebook. Memo: Guard to stay in D.C. through 26. National Guard troops will be on the streets of Washington, D.C. until the end of the year, according to a memo reviewed by the Associated Press. The memo, signed by Army Secretary Dan Driscoll and dated Wednesday, said the conditions of the mission warranted an extension past the end of next month to continue ongoing support for President Trump's efforts to restore law and order. Since Washington is a congressionally established federal district as president, Trump has much greater control over the police and National Guard, which he can control directly. Trump activated 800 members of the D.C. National Guard in August under an emergency order. Those numbers were quickly augmented by troops from states run by Republican governors. There are currently about 2,600 National Guard troops from Washington and about 700 from D.C. and the rest of the other 11 states. You're listening to a reading of articles from the Buffalo News for Sunday, January 18th on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. We'll return for more readings after this short break. Your reader for this hour has been Edwin J. Vieira, and for your next hour, the reader will be Ron Bickelman. Stay tuned, but thanks for listening.
A quick programming note: tomorrow is Martin Luther King Day, and because it's a major federal holiday, the offices of the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service will be closed. At 9 o'clock, you'll be hearing a rebroadcast of the Sunday Buffalo News, so you'll be hearing this voice again around 10 o'clock tomorrow. At noon, in place of the USA Today, we have African American Hour from our friends at the Audio Reader in Lawrence, Kansas. It's news, information, commentary, and history about the African American community. At 1 o'clock, we have history from Mind's Eye in St. Louis. This happened today in history, the 1950 heist of the Ancient Stone of Destiny. Predictions for 2025 from 1925, Rockefellers, and the 1758 Friendly Fire Incident. At 4 o'clock, in place of the rebroadcast of the news that usually airs there, we have Blind and Disability News Hour from Mind's Eye. At 5 o'clock, we have Black News and Culture. It features articles from Roots, Landscape, Essence, and Ebony. That's from the Audio Rating Service in Fort Wayne, Indiana. At 5:30, we have American Heritage. All the rest of our programming will be the same, but those are the major changes. We'll be back in the office on Tuesday. Stay with us, though, for the continuation of the Buffalo News, which is coming up in just a moment.
continue now with our reading of stories and articles from today's Buffalo News. Your reader is Ron Bickelman. County gets $1.6 million to replace lead pipes currently in system. The Erie County Water Authority received $1.6 million to replace lead pipes, according to an announcement made Friday by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Representative Tim Kennedy, and ECWA Board Chairman Jerome Schad. The funds were part of a $3.6 million package to improve water infrastructure throughout western New York, secured by Gillibrand, Senator Chuck Schumer, both Democrats of New York, and announced on January 9th. Families can't keep waiting, Gillibrand said during a news conference to announce the funds. That's why I've continued to work to bring federal dollars to address this problem in our communities throughout New York. Town of Ellicott also got $1 million to extend water service to an area where private wells were unsafe to drink. And the town of Alma got $1 million to consolidate 2 old wastewater treatment plants. By 2027, the Erie County Water Authority will be required by federal rules to deliver water and lead levels that do not exceed the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's new standard of 10 parts per billion, down from previous limit of 15 parts per billion. And by 2037, all lead pipes under the jurisdiction must be identified and replaced. The ECWA has established around 6,000 service lines in its 9 districts, and Schad said the Water Authority's goal is to get all the lead service lines out by 2028. Exposure to even small amounts of lead can be dangerous to human health, especially children. In children, exposure to low levels of lead has been linked to central and peripheral nervous system damage, learning disabilities, shorter stature, impaired hearing, and impaired formation of and function of blood cells, according to the EPA. Because of the past wrongs, we continue to live with a legacy of outdated technologies, of polluted aging infrastructure, Kennedy said Friday. Chief among those is our lead pipes and the infrastructure that service our community, and quite frankly, are contaminating the water that children and families are drinking on a regular basis. We have to change this. The funding is going to go a long way to helping us achieve clean drinking water for our families today and in future generations, he continued. The $1.6 million going to the Erie County Water Authority was expected to help offset high costs of replacing lead service lines and allow the authority to prioritize homes with vulnerable populations, according to the Gillibrand office. The money also comes after the ECWA raised service rates by 8.25%, putting the service cost higher than those paid in the city of Buffalo, Rochester, Monroe County, and Onondaga County. The rising rates are due in part to the federal mandate to remove the lead pipes. Schad said that Friday's news conference at the ECWA estimates it'll cost more than $320 million, averaging $25 million per, to comply with the EPA's order. The Water Authority has already spent about $15 million in 2025 to identify and replace lead pipes in the service area. It plans to spend another $30 million this year, Schad said. The pressure on us is huge, Schad said during a Friday news conference. The immediate money will go directly to helping at least 150 to 200 homes. Farrow's judge rejects doubts about indictment, says defense doesn't need access to grand jury materials. Lawyers for defendants charged in the Farrow's witness death case will not gain access to transcripts of the grand jury proceedings that led to a 28-count superseding indictment a federal judge ruled Friday. The indictment named 4 people, including Farrow's Gentlemen's Club owner Peter Gerace Jr. and Outlaws Motorcycle Club national leader John Ehrman, as part of the conspiracy to retaliate against Crystal Quinn for cooperating with government agents and prosecutors in the federal case against the strip club owner. A court ruling unsealed in November raised great doubts about the felony indictment against those whom prosecutors believe played a key role in her fatal drug overdose in the summer of 2023 before Gerace's case went to trial. U.S. Magistrate Judge Jeremiah J. McCarthy described the indictment against Gerace and others as replete with misstatements and incomplete descriptions of the laws that they're accused of breaking. Questioning the independence of the grand jury, McCarthy issued 2 orders directing the government to disclose specific grand jury materials to the defendants. Chief U.S. District Judge Elizabeth Wolford, who inherited the case last July, vacated McCarthy's orders. I have conducted my own review of the entire grand jury record, and I do not share the magistrate's jury's concerns, Wolford said in a written ruling. Wolford noted she became a district judge in December 2013, and this is the only time she reviewed the entire grand jury record. The magistrate's judge disclosure orders delve into the inner workings and thought processes of the grand jury, Wolford said, adding that McCarthy's orders question the independence of the grand jury based on the subjective assessment as to how much time it should have taken to return the indictment, and based on the imposition of a rule on league instructions that does not exist. That is incorrect. Wolford said the magistrate judge's orders directing the government to produce grand jury materials to the defendants were clearly erroneous and contrary to law, and they are vacated. Quinn's fatal fentanyl overdose led to indictments of 4 people whom federal prosecutors accused of playing a role in her death. Quinn, 37, a former exotic dancer, had agreed to cooperate in the federal government's bribery, sex, and drug trafficking case against Geraci. Named in the indictment were Geraci, Erman, Simon Gogolak, who called 911 to report Quinn's death in his home, and Howard Hinkle Jr., among the last to be seen with her. The grand jury indictment accused Gogolak of intentionally giving Quinn a lethal dose of fentanyl. All 4 pleaded not guilty and remain jailed. 2 others are accused of making false and evasive statements to law enforcement about her death. Michael Ron Cohen, whom prosecutors said was the president of Rare Breed Motorcycle Club Wellsville's chapter, and Frank Knight, a Wellsville resident who lived across the street from Gogolak. Defense lawyer for Erman expressed disappointment with Wolford's rulings. What would it hurt to have defense lawyers review the grand jury transcripts? Ernie Donald Thompson asked. Who better to point out the concerns than defense counsel, who have a vested interest in making sure the standards are compiled with before anyone is tried or convicted, Thompson told the news. McCarthy said a prosecutor told grand jurors in August at the onset of the first indictment that he would serve as their legal advisor, and the prosecutor presenting the proposed indictment would explain the charges and relevant legal definitions. 5 months later, when presenting the second superseding indictment to the grand jury to consider, a different prosecutor did not read the statutes relevant to the proposed changes. He also did not explain legal definitions. Instead, he read the proposed second superseding indictment to the grand jury, and then he left it with the grand jury so they can consider the charges. The grand jury voted to return the proposed second superseding indictment. McCarthy said he was struck by how little time the grand jury took on a Friday afternoon to return the lengthy indictment, which McCarthy said raises concerns to whether it acted on its own judgment independently of the prosecutor as required by law. How, then, can defendants or this court have confidence in the grand jury acted independently of the government in returning any counts of the second superseding indictment, McCarthy said. Prosecutors objected to McCarthy's order, saying he ordered disclosure of the grand jury materials for reasons the defense lawyer never raised. In her ruling, Wolford said that the Supreme Court has recognized that the proper functioning of the grand jury system depends on the secrecy of the grand jury proceedings. Even if a judge could order disclosure of grand jury materials upon discovering prosecutorial misconduct not raised by parties, the failure to read the charging statute when presenting an indictment to the grand jury is not a prosecutorial misconduct, nor it is a valid basis to dismiss an indictment, Wolford said. In other words, even if the magistrate judge has the authority to order disclosure of the grand jury records, it was clearly erroneous and contrary to law for him to conclude that he should do so. Wolford said she is not suggesting U.S. Attorney follows a best practice by reading the charges to the grand jury without reading the text of the statute or of identifying the elements of the charge. Based on the comments in the oral argument, how to present an indictment in the district is apparently left to the discretion of the prosecutor. The chief judge said, "This seems far too much latitude to the preference and practices of a particular prosecutor. Also, this law is clear that legal instructors need not be provided a grand jury," Wolford said. As for McCarthy's comment on how little time it took the grand jury to return the indictment, Wolford said, "It's not an appropriate metric to gauge the grand jury's independence because it rests in pure speculation. Based on the review of the entire grand jury record, a more reasonable takeaway is that after sitting for many months and hearing testimony from many witnesses who offered evidence about the death of Crystal Quinn, the grand jury needed little time to determine that the second superseding indictment should also be returned." State asked to ensure that Tonawanda Crematory is okay. State regulators are cracking down on Amagon Funeral Home's Sheridan Park Crematory after a test conducted last month by the company worried neighbors that the cremations operations of the town of Tonawanda facility would restart. The State Division of Cemeteries determined that the company had violated state law by barring co-ownership of funeral homes and crematories, according to documents obtained by the Buffalo News. This action follows years of complaints from neighbors about foul-smelling emissions coming from the crematory on Sheridan Drive at Parker Boulevard. The State Department of Environmental Conservation had previously shut down the crematory, but operations were in past allowed to resume. Crematory last opened full-time in May before the passage of a state law that required its closing. The residents have been through quite a lot, said Assembly Member Bill Conrad, Democrat, town of Tonawanda. They enjoyed the first summer in a long time. They didn't have to fear the smell of the possible debris and other things, and it's a welcome thing in the neighborhood. Amagon executives did not respond to a request for comment on Friday. Their lawyer, Robert Knorr, also did not return a message from the Buffalo News. The crematory, which opened in the early 90s, shares a space with the Amagon Funeral Home on 2600 Sheridan Drive. Town officials said people who live near Amagon Crematory have long objected to the presence of the edge of a residential neighborhood. They've raised concerns about the odor, about soot landing on their properties, and other potential health risks. The facility was shut down in 2012 for violating a state permit, but also Amagon installed new pollution controls, and the DEC allowed it to reopen in 2018. Conrad and then State Senator Ryan of Democrat of Buffalo in 2021 sponsored legislation that gave Amagon permission to move its crematory to another non-residential site within the town. The legislation, which required Ryan and Conrad said then, because the state law bars both the construction of a new funeral crematory and the relocation of existing combinations such as Amagon. The Amagon Combination Crematory was allowed to stay open because its operations predated the 1998 law banning such facilities. Amagon did not take advantage of the 2021 legislation to find a new location for its crematory, frustrating state lawmakers. By 2024, they introduced legislation removing Amagon's exemption from the 1998 law and allowed the crematory to remain open. Governor Hochul said in November 2024, signed the bill into law, giving Amagon until May to shut down the crematory. That's where things stood until December 5th, when WKBW-TV reported neighbors had seen smoke coming from the stack at Amagon. Conrad said he learned about the emissions. He asked the governor's office in the State Division of Crematories, part of the New York Department of State, to look into what happened. I think the recent test is irksome, he said. I'm not going to lie, I was quite irritated that seeing after we had discussed this, the Division of Crematories contacted the Sheridan Park Crematory in September to remind them, the company officials, the 2024 law ended their exemption. The division, in its September 22nd letter, directed Sheridan Park Crematory to report by January 9th whether its operation, is in operation, and if so, whether it's in compliance with the law barring the combination of ownership of the funeral home and crematory, according to a copy of this related to the documents obtained by the news. On December 17th, the division sent a follow-up letter delivered by hand to the Sheridan Park Crematory. This letter describes a November 19th visit by the division staff person to the crematory, where the staff was told the crematory had ceased the operations. However, the division said it was informed on December 16th that the crematory planned to resume operating 2 days on December 18th. The division in December 17th letter demanded by the next day a list from Sheridan Park Crematory of all its officers and directors and a statement insisting that the crematory doesn't commingle its finances with Amagon or another funeral home. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from today's Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Time is 15 minutes after the hour. Continuing along with city and regional news, Richardson Project shines light on site's roots as an asylum. The Richardson Olmsted campus is looking lively these days. Thousands attended 2 large outdoor holiday markets that took over the Elmwood Avenue facing South Lawn this past fall, and the Richardson Hotel Bar has reopened. You can even get a little bite there. Word is that Doug Jamil's Porte Cohere entrance to the hotel will soon be removed. I won't be sad, but whatever happens, I and many other local residents want this major place to work. Few thought the abandoned former Buffalo State Asylum for the Insane would ever see reuse. It took a long time, but it happened. Nobody wants to go back to those days of wondering when and if it would be demolished. This doesn't mean the complex's institutional past should be buried. We owe to the troubled people who made their homes there, however briefly, and their families, that this should be documented, respected, even honored. That's happening. The results of a collaboration between the University of Buffalo Art Galleries and the Richardson Olmsted campus will shine a public spotlight on the reason H.H. Richardson's masterpiece was built. An exhibition entitled Buffalo Rembrandt's Project opens at the Richardson on January 29th, with a public reception that day from 6 to 8 p.m. The exhibition will be installed adjacent to the Lipsey Architecture Center, Buffalo, on the ground floor of the hotel. It focuses specifically on women who were institutionalized at the asylum before 1880 and 1974. The topic of women who have been institutionalized is also the focus of the show by artist Kimberly Chapman at UB's Anderson Gallery, entitled 86 Reasons for Asylum Admission. I wrote about the beginning stages of this enterprise in November when a call went out for relatives of women who had been patients at the asylum. I attended an open afternoon at UB's Anderson Gallery in which people who responded to the call came to the gallery, bringing photographs of female family members who had been at the asylum, as well as items that these one-time patients had owned. The family members were interviewed, and these items were were photographed by UB photography students. These photographs will be on display at Richardson Olmsted. I was able to talk to a few family members who showed up on November 21st at the Anderson Galleries. They had stories. Mark Sanglian's second great aunt, Sarah Ann Sadie McMullen, was a patient at the asylum in 1891 to 1893. She was there because at age 17 she attempted to kill 2 young girls who were in her charge. She took them out to the middle of a train trestle and ran through the now Akron Falls and pushed them off the bridge, Sanglian told me. One of the gals, Nellie Mae Connors, died instantly after striking her head on an abutment. Della Brown survived and testified in the murder trial. Brown lived until 1963. My great aunt was tried by the same district attorney who prosecuted William Turner, who was the first man in the world to be executed in the electric chair. Sadie McMullen was not executed in the electric chair. She was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy and was committed to the Buffalo State Asylum. Released in 1893, McMullen disappeared. That early release isn't as shocking as it sounds. Her childhood onset epilepsy had likely resolved as her brain developed. Sanglian is an 8-year volunteer docent at Richardson Olmsted campus. He's also been a mental health counselor. He feels it's important to honor the history of the asylum, but he's unhappy that the State Office of Mental Health has sealed the inmates' records, which remain inaccessible to relatives or anyone else who would like to know more about his Aunt Sadie. Anne Marie Stuccio was luckier. The office gave her mother's psychiatrist, Armand L. DiFrancesco, gave her all his notes on her mother. Elizabeth Jane Kramer, after DiFrancesco died, according to Stuccio, who's 70, Kramer who also suffered from depression, was in now the Buffalo State Asylum throughout Stutzel's childhood and in the 50s. But Kramer was a fighter. After her first husband, Stutzel's father, died in a car accident in 1963 at 34, which brought on a depression attack, Kramer recovered enough to prove herself competent to collect her insurance money in court and came home to care for her daughter. She then married someone she met at the hospital, Victor Vanella, who had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenic, but was a steady job at UB as a maintenance man. Together, Vanella and Kramer owned a big house on Lafayette Avenue and rented rooms to other people who had been released from the asylum. It sounds like a good premise for a heartwarming sitcom, but the illness was real. Stutzel, whose nurse, notes that the first thing I learned to do was get my stepfather injections when he was, living a moment. Sadly, Vanella's moments became more and more frequent. Stutzel remembers that in Kramer's early days at the state facility, she had something called Metrozole treatments, the old-fashioned way they did ECT, electroconducive treatments. They put you in a diabetic coma, and then they would have a seizure, and then they would make you drink orange juice to get your sugar back up. She told me about those, and she told me about the cold baths. Kramer turned to private treatment through Bryland Hospital in 1967 and was under care of DeFrancesco until she died at the age of 60 in 1995. Stutzel credits DeFrancesco for keeping her mother out of the asylum, but adds, I was 18, I left this mess, I got married and moved to California. We can all point to messes in our own personal history, just as we'd like to soon forget. But growing up with a parent whose mental illness led to metrozole treatments and later electroconductive therapy isn't something that can easily be shaken. You can easily shake off. During our brief conversation, Stutzel demonstrated resilience and impressible humor. The spirit is what artist Kimberly Chapman, who spoke to many of the relatives more than I did, wanted to evoke. Chapman will be in Buffalo for the exhibition opening and stated in an email that the Richardson Project restores individuality to women historically reduced to diagnoses, revealing how identity persists even under institutional erasure. Many of these families said the hospitalized relative was never spoken of. It wasn't until many of them were in their middle ages that they learned more. I'm glad that Stutzel knew and understood her mother's turbulent history so well. It was clearly shaped her kind, downright personality, which is evident in the video news photographer Libby March captured on that day in the Anderson Gallery. Now the nonprofit Richardson Campus Corporation is directly operating the hotel, Ryan says. We're trying to embrace fully as possible. Tours of the campus have been offered for a while, but Ryan says there are have been on offer for a while, but Ryan says there are plans for more. We have another project. We want to take a couple of rooms and create an 1890s era nurses station and patients room. In the meantime, there is a Buffalo Remembrance Project. The exhibition will be up for at least a year. It's a good start toward properly acknowledging the history. As rate cap deadline looms, banks still have questions. President Trump this month told the credit card industry that it had till January 20th to comply to its demand for a 10% cap on interest rates. Now, consumer groups, politicians, and bankers alike remain unclear on what the White House has planned and whether Trump even remains serious about the idea. So far, the White House has not provided any detail about what will happen to credit card companies that won't offer lower rates. White House President Caroline Leavitt said Friday that Trump has an expectation that credit card companies will accede to the demand. A researcher who studied Trump's proposal when it first floated during the 2024 presidential campaign found Americans would save roughly about $100 million in interest a year if credit card rates were capped at 10%. Bank lobbyists and many who have spending much of their past week scrambling to figure out what the White House planned for their industry have been left in the dark. The Dodd-Frank Act, which passed in 2008 financial crisis that overhauled the financial industry, explicitly prohibits at least one federal bank regulator from setting usury limits on loans. Without a law or executive order, it may simply come down to Trump using political pressure to force credit card company industry to do what he wants, and he's done with other industries. For example, Trump demanded that pharmaceutical companies cut drug prices, which resulted in some pledges by the drug industry CEOs to do what he asked. Wall Street has little interest in a war with the White House especially as banks benefited from the industry-friendly deregulatory agenda that Trump administration has provided so far. When it comes to credit card rates, the messaging out of the bank lobbying groups and bank executives have been twofold. They have pushed back on the cap, but in the same breath have offered to work with the White House. Now let's look at Ask Eric. 5 siblings completely disengaged from mom's care. Dear Eric, about 10 years back, when I became a primary caretaker for our mother, even though there are 5 other siblings scattered throughout the country, she resides at a high-level care assisted living facility nearby, a healthy 99, but has some significant dementia. I'm visiting 1 or 2 times a week and also take her to all our medical appointments and out to lunch. I arrange FaceTime and phone calls with my siblings because mom wants to see and talk to them. I'm also responsible for her finances, which makes me quite anxious. I enjoy my mother. She's great. My issue is at the other siblings. I write them emails with information on how our mother is doing and how difficult and complex the transition to Medicaid was. Rarely do they reply to the emails. Every now and then, I get an email reply to all. Once again, thanks for taking care of everything. I wrote an email to 2 of my closer siblings asking them to please model thank you emails for the others. To reply to my email update with something like, we know this is difficult and takes a lot of your time. We really appreciate it. I asked for the words I wanted to hear back. What I got back was one basically, yeah, we'll do all that when this is over, whatever that means. I was furious. Very few words of appreciation and of course nothing from the other 3. I will continue to care for my mom and I'm ready to cut them all off. I'm feeling used and abused and they can't even do what I ask of them when I need it. They all will get equal shares of the small inheritance. I made sure we will there as well. What do I do with this anger and how do I get what I need from the others? Unsupported support system. Dear support, this is not fair, and though it may be a cold comfort knowing that you're not alone, many caretaking family members express frustration or burnout from lack of support. Unfortunately, your siblings have shown a level of disengagement that goes beyond simple misunderstandings. Kudos to you for asking specifically for what you need, and shame on them for not responding in kind. Though your anger is justified, it is not going to feed you. So I'd recommend talking to a therapist about the way you're feeling and ongoing frustrations with your siblings. It would be helpful to have someone who can listen to you and help you process. Also, seek out support and even just conversation with friends and other loved ones. They may not fully understand what you're going through, but it's still helpful to hear someone say, this is hard and I'm sorry. Your area agency on aging and National Council on Aging will also have caregiver resources from support groups in financial education and more. Dear Eric, recently I decided not to attend a holiday gathering with family members I've joined for decades, and instead hosted my cousins from the other side of the family who have been very kind to me over the years. I wound up unhappy. No sooner than I offered, they decided on the menu, even though I had already placed an order. After the fact, they told me they couldn't eat or drink what they would bring. Well, I got ready and they bought food I didn't expect or make arrangements. They didn't help with some of the cleanup and did not include me in the conversation. And to top it off, they turned the TV on to watch a football game. My other family had not done that in more than 50 years. I'm still steaming. Should I let it pass or not have an issue or an invitation, or accept theirs and resume and resume going forward with the other family? What do you think? Upset hostess. Dear hostess, these guests don't seem very gracious or grateful at all. Perhaps it's a little quirky personality, but it's fair to expect more. A generous interpretation suggests they were just making themselves at home, and their version of at home has rough edges that clash with your sense of hospitality. Either way, this doesn't seem like a good fit for the holiday gathering. Don't let it stick in your craw, though. Consider it a you live and learn situation. Next year, you can resume the tradition that works for you. If the cousins extend an invitation, you can gratefully decline, citing your other plans. If you have a desire, perhaps suggest an alternative way of connecting that's less likely to cause consternation. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from today's Buffalo News. Time on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The time is 30 minutes after the hour. Now let's look at sports. Bills frustrated by officials' ruling of key play and loss. Denver. The Buffalo Bills felt like they got cheated. That's what makes Saturday's 33-30 loss in overtime to the Broncos in the AFC Divisional Round so hard to stomach. Worst things that can happen in a classic game for officiating. The worst thing that can happen in a classic game is for officiating to play a big role. That's what happened at Empower Field, Coach Sean McDermott said, leaving his team with yet another devastating playoff feat in his 9-year tenure. On 3rd and 11 from the 36-yard line, with 7:55 left in overtime, Bills quarterback Josh Allen threw deep, intended for wide receiver Brandon Cooks on the Broncos' 20. Cooks had the ball in both hands as he went to the ground, while Bronco quarterback Jaquan McMillan attempted to wrestle it away. Cook's knee hit the ground, then McMillan landed on top of him. As he slipped over, McMillan took the ball away. As he flipped over. On the field, officials ruled the play an interception, giving the Broncos possession at their 20 with 7:46 remaining. The Broncos then moved down the field and get in position for a game-winning 23-yard field goal by Will Lutz. The Bills' locker room was devastated after the game. Several players had tears in their eyes as they sat at their lockers. Others expressed frustration at the impact officials had on the game, including two controversial defensive pass interference penalties that went against Bills in the Bills' Denver game-winning drive. During the post-game press conference, McDermott was as animated as he has been in his 9 years as Bills head coach, questioning why the play was not halted so the officials could properly review it. Because the game was in overtime, coaches do not have the ability to throw the challenge flag. If it's ruled that way, then why wasn't it slowed down just to make sure that we have this right? That would have made a lot of sense to me, McDermott said, to make sure that we have done the right thing, because that's a pivotal play in this game. We have the ball at the 20, maybe a kicking of winning field goal there, so we'll just have to leave it at that. McDermott, though, had more to say. I'm saying it because I'm standing up for Buffalo, damn it, he said. I'm standing up for us because that went on is not how it should go down in my estimation. The guys spent 3 hours out there playing football, pouring their guts out, to not even say, hey, let's just slow this thing down. That's why I'm bothered. After the game, head referee Taylor Jeffers was asked in a pool report for his explanation of the play. Here was his response. The receiver has to complete the process of a catch. He was going to the ground as part of the process of the catch, and he lost possession of the ball when he hit the ground. The defender gained possession at that point. The defender is the one who completed the process of the catch, so the defender was awarded the ball. McDermott did not accept that interpretation. He was even went so far as to calling the Buffalo News from the team plane before departing back to Buffalo to offer more of his thoughts. The play was not even close, he said. That's a catch all the way. I sat in my locker and I looked at it probably 20 times and nobody can convince me otherwise. I just have no idea how the NFL handled it, in particular the way that they did. I think players and the fans deserve an explanation, McDermott continued, here's the deal, right? The fans deserve more. The players certainly deserve more. They deserve an explanation, and it's a shame that the game is decided on a call like that, and there's no time spent with the head official going underneath the hood or a replay booth, right, to the monitor. I don't understand how that works. I don't understand how that could be the case when it's such a close play. So basically there's no one person ruling on that play or only New York ruling on that play. I don't agree with that. If that's the case, I don't agree with that. that is the best approach to decide a game on that play. McDermott has always been cautious with the approach to commenting publicly about officiating. Doing so brings with it the risk of being fined by the NFL. He was asked why, in this case, he felt so compelled to do so, because I only speak up when there's a wrong. In this case, it happened to be our team. We win with class, we lose with class in Buffalo. That's how we handle our business. But when I'm looking at that replay myself and being objective with what I'm saying, you cannot convince me that was not a catch. But Bill's Buffalo possession, ball at the 20. You can't convince me. I'm speaking up because I feel strongly that this was a catch and the possession should have been ball belongs to Buffalo. I can't agree with their assessment of the change of possession or whatever the statement was. I can't agree with that. We're not just going to sit here and take it, is what I'm saying. We're not just going to sit here and take it. I'm ticked off about it. I feel strongly, as I've looked at the review in my locker, that this is a catch, possession, Buffalo, and that the process should have been a long pause, handled differently. I don't understand why the head official who was at the game does not get a chance to look at the same thing people in New York are ruling on. For his part, Cook said he believed he made the catch. The veteran receiver became emotional in his locker room when discussing the play. At the end of the day, the way I think about it is you make it in a way that it doesn't have to be in the official's hands, he said. I'm not always going to, it's always going to be my mindset. I'm never going to cower away from that. That's the man I am. I'm the player, I own it. It was the latest string in a heartbreaking playoff loss for the Bills. This one very well hurt the most because the team believes it had it taken from them. Allen's 4 turnovers help end Buffalo's season. Josh Allen was red-faced and teary-eyed when Buffalo Bills quarterback walked from the doorway of the visitors' media room Saturday night to the podium for the post-game press conference. Allen hung his head while listening to the first questions, sniffled and raised his left hand to wipe tears from his left eye. After briefly collecting his thoughts, Allen's voice quivered as he tried to articulate the overwhelming raw emotion that hit him and the rest of the Bills when Will Lutz kicked a 23-yard field goal with 4:46 left in overtime to send the Broncos to the AFC Championship game. A 20-game season filled with injuries, character-building comebacks, remarkable plays, and historic feats was over. Extremely difficult, Allen said, before he shook his head and peered at the room full of cameras. I feel like I let my teammates down. Allen was responsible for 4 of the Bills' season-high 5 turnovers. His fumbles on consecutive plays helped the Broncos take a 13-point lead in the third quarter, and his second interception Saturday at Empower Field, Mile High, happened with 7:75 remaining in overtime. The interception was a controversial call because Allen's target, wide receiver Brandon Cooks, appeared to have made Brandon Cooks appeared to make the catch, but the context did not make the NFL's resigning MVP feel any better about the result. His defense stopped Denver on the first drive of overtime, clearing the way for Buffalo to win the game with a field goal. Broncos quarterback Jaquan McMillan intercepted Allen on the 9th play of the drive. In addition to the turnovers, Allen made too many uncharacteristic mistakes. He underthrew Shakir on the fourth quarter drive that forced the Bills to settle for a 31-yard field goal and put the Bills ahead 27 to 23 on the final drive. Allen missed tight end Dawson Knox in what would have been a game-winning touchdown on the pass before his second interception. Allen misfired a throw to Mecole Hardman. Of the most effective postseason performers in NFL history, succumbed to the pressure-heavy Broncos defense based on his inaccurate passes. The injuries that have bothered him, the injuries in recent weeks, his record streak of 200 playoff pass attempts without an interception, and in the third quarter, he underthrew Curtis Samuel. Just missed opportunities throughout the game, Allen said, fighting through tears as he preceded his 7th postseason defeat. As he processed his 7th postseason defeat, it's been a long season. I hate how it ended. It's going to stick with me for a long time. The Broncos, aided by 2 pass interference penalties, drove 75 yards in 6 plays to set up Lutz's game-winning kick. Allen buried his head in his hands as Denver celebrated a win that Allen and teammates almost wrestled away with another second half comeback that showed their mettle. Road teams with at least -3 turnover differential were 185 heading into the Super Bowl era. In the visitors' locker room, Allen and his many teammates wept. He apologized. They refused to accept. None of them thought this loss was on Allen. Though responsible for part of the deficit, Allen led the comeback with hard-nosed runs on his injured right foot and left knee. He stood in the pocket to make clutch throws for the Broncos' best pass rush, ferociously fought through blocks to try to hit him. On consecutive touchdown drives, Allen completed 10 of 10 passes, 10 passes for plus 10 yards. His 25-yard completion to tight end Dalton Kincaid led to Keon Coleman's 10-yard touchdown reception, and the Bills took a 24-23 lead when Allen threw a perfect pass to Kincaid for a 15-yard touchdown with 13:29 left in the quarter. We all feel that way, Cook said as tears began to stream down his face. You worked so hard. Personally, I'm just so thankful to be part of this. I look back like, man, what could I have done to be able to alleviate some of the pressure from him? You just love this game so much, and when you come up short like that, it's going to sting for a long time. There's no next week. The Bills' issues in Denver did not begin with Allen. James Cook, the NFL's leading rusher champion in 2025, lost an NFL-worst fourth fumble at the Broncos' 30-yard line when Buffalo had a chance to take a 14-3 lead in the second quarter. Denver's second-year quarterback Bo Nix drove teammates 69 yards on 8 plays and capped a 7-yard touchdown pass to offensive lineman Frank Crubb. With the Bills down 17-10 late in the second quarter, Bills coach Sean McDermott instructed his offense to try to create an explosive play. The ninth-year coach did not care that there were no timeouts and only 16 seconds. He wanted to see if the quarterback could make a remarkable play. Allen almost did. He escaped the pocket to find an open field, but did not secure the ball as he prepared to get tackled. Bronco outside linebacker Nick Bonito knocked the ball free, caused a fumble, and Denver kicked a 50-yard field goal to take a 10-point lead in the half. In the Bills' first offensive play of the second half, Bonito sacked Allen to force a fumble. It cannot be a coincidence that Allen has not looked the same since his right foot got twisted in the second quarter sack in Cleveland, December 21st. He played through a variety of injuries throughout his career. The latest round of setbacks, however, seemed to impact his ability to step into throws. 17 always plays his heart out like he did today. Shakir said, we all got to do what's best for our best foot forward, and every single play matters. There's plays I want back. I could have done better. It's not all on him. He's our leader. We appreciate him for everything he does. He's a dog. I'm not going to fight until he's going to fight until the end. It's not like on him. We're going to help him out. No one should criticize Allen. Yes, it was a bad game, but how many times has he carried Buffalo victory throughout his career? This season alone, he led to a 3-1 record when the defense allowed at least 200 rushing yards. Now let's look at soccer. Senegal coach makes appeal to Mane. Senegal coach Pape Thaw has appealed to star forward Sadio Mane to reconsider his decision to make the Africa Cup of Nations his last. Mane, the two-time African Footballer of the Year, is playing in his 6th Africa Cup and fired Senegal into the final by scoring for a 1-0 win over Egypt in the semifinals. The 33-year-old Mane told journalists that after the match that this will be his last Africa Cup. Thaw said Saturday that he hopes Mane will listen and will to the will of the Senegalese people. This is a nation behind him. The nation would like to see him continue because he's made this decision in the heat of the moment, and that the country doesn't agree, Thaw said, the day before Senegal faces host nation Morocco for the decider. And I was the coach. I don't agree with it at all. We'd like to keep him as long as possible. Mane led Senegal to a 2021 Africa Cup title and has been leading the team at this edition with capital Kalidou Koulibaly suspended for 1 game earlier in the tournament and again for Sunday's finale. Mane's goal against Egypt was his 11th altogether in the Africa Cup. He also set up 9 more. He's a legend everywhere for Africa. He represents Africa. He represents the world. He's an example. We need people like him in this life. He teaches life lessons, his resilience, his education, and how he gives his all for Senegal, Thaw said. He gave us his life, so we would win this tournament in 2021. So we would get our first star. Thaw said he doesn't want to see Mane leave, and his teammates don't either. Defender Musi Nakate said he didn't have enough time to explain what Mane represents for the Senegalese and African soccer. What defines Sadio is hard work, love for his country, and as he declared after the match against Egypt, this will be his last African Cup game, his sixth Africa Cup, so he knows his longevity and consistency. Nakati said before Senegal goes for the second title, we owe it to him to bring him back the second star. Mane still has the World Cup to come before he quits this national team. The Teranga Lions have been drawn to the group with Norway, France, and then a playoff winner between Bolivia, Suriname, and Iraq. Let's take a look at hockey now. Kekalainen maintains adults in the room approach. The vibe on the ice has been completely different since Jarmo Kekalainen took over as general manager of the Sabres last month. When the Sabres beat Anaheim last Saturday, Kekalainen's 10th win in 11 games at the helm allowed him to tie Brian Murray in 2007 with Ottawa and Pierre Lacroix, 1994 with Quebec as the fastest GM to win 10 games in a single franchise. With a single franchise in league history. It feels like you can expect things to be quite a bit different in the front office as well. They already have far more adults in the room now than at any time under Kevin Adams, first-time GM whose staff was equally thin on NHL experience. Kekalainen, of course, is 11 years GM in Columbus. His former assistant GM there, Josh Flynn, has joined the Sabres in a similar role. And Kekalainen turned heads around the league when hiring former Montreal GM Marc Bergevin as the Buffalo new associate GM. Bergevin, in turn, got the Sabres on the path to hiring Stacey Rost as pro scout last week, a move that normally doesn't move the needle, but this one, however, was quite a bit different. Rost won the Stanley Cup as assistant GM with Tampa Bay Lightning in 2020 and 2021 and earned his seals of approval as the GM of the Syracuse Crunch for several seasons. Rost and Bergevin worked together for the first time last month in Switzerland on Team Canada's entry in the Spengler Cup tournament. They are the kind of people the Sabres have badly needed in hockey management. One of the things Jarmo mentioned is we need more coverage on the pro side, Bergevin said last week in his first chat in Buffalo. Rost is located out near Vancouver, and as far as pro scouting, it was a good location for us to add another set of eyes to watch. We kind of spread thin on the pro side. We felt bringing Stacey brings us that element. The Sabres front office under Adams simply didn't have enough NHL experience where, other than Jason Carmanos, 3 Stanley Cup titles with Carolina and Pittsburgh, and while Karamanos did a solid job helping build the Rochester Amherst into a perennial playoff team, he was working remotely out of Pittsburgh and was not around the Sabres very much. This clearly didn't mesh with Kekalainen, who wanted an associate GM, so Karamanos was fired 5 days after Kekalainen took over the job last month. You can bet there will be more additions and probably some deletions in the front office as well, as it's about time we're seeing people with NHL experience brought in here. Jeremiah Crow, the Sabres' current director of pro scouting, was a scout when Adams promoted him in 2020 to lead both pro and amateur scouting. It was a classic case of owner Terry Pegula running a thin front office in the wake of COVID. Nobody with Crow's resume should have such a prominent role in an NHL front office. Adams initially hired Crow in 2024 to be on the staff of LECOM, Harbor Center's Academy of Hockey. Crow had served 3 years as an assistant coach at Buff State, then worked at USHL as a player personnel director in the U.S. National Team Development Program. Hiring of Rost begs the question of how much his role will grow in the pro scouting here and how much Crow's days are numbered. It's also interesting to see Kekalainen does with the analytics department Adams formulated. Sam Ventura, the team's president of hockey strategy and research, runs the show and has a strong background in the area. He helped Pittsburgh Penguins in the Stanley Cup in 2016 and 2017 and was one of the founders of the WarOnIce.com, one of the earliest top ice analytics sites. But the Sabres' analytic approach to scouting has been a disappointment at times, with middling work done in free agency and Adams not getting a whole lot done on trade deadlines. Casey Middlestat for Bowen Byram being a notable exception. Bergevin has full faith in Kirkalainen to evaluate all facets of Sabres organization. It takes time to evaluate where you are at, Bergevin said. I knew him when he was working in St. Louis a little bit, and when I became a GM in Montreal, he was already in Columbus. And over the years at GM meetings, we also hung out. Jarmo was a guy that's very active on the phone, and so was I. We got into a lot of discussions about players and how we got to know each other. Bergevin showed that example. Kirkalainen carries a lot of respect within the game. Jarmo has a big name in Finland for 10 to 20 years already. Former defenseman Teppo Numminen said Thursday while in town for the reunion of 2005-2016. Just to be a GM in the NHL, everybody know how tough the job is. Getting the job in Columbus, and especially right here, he's respected, he's respectful, and everyone respects him. There's not many European GMs in the league. European hockey is a little bit different, so him just being from Finland and Europe is a big thing for Finnish hockey. As for making trades, Bergevin threw some laughs from reporters when he referred to Kirkalainen as not easy to deal with. He made some really good trades. Jarmo was black and white. He never led you the wrong path, Bergevin said. You knew within the first 10 minutes if there was something that could make sense for both teams, because I honestly believe that when you make a trade, it has to make sense for both teams. Nobody's going to make a trade not knowing what they're in for. So Jarmo has a good way of knowing without trying to run your team what you're looking at and if it's a good fit. Sometimes you have a player that's not a fit anywhere else, but only with a certain team. Lots of times it's about fit, and Jarmo is good at that. Now let's take a look at the scoreboard. NHL. Friday's results. Carolina 9, Florida 1. Detroit 4, San Jose Sharks 2. St. Louis 3, Tampa Bay 2 in a shootout. Nashville 7, Colorado 3. Anaheim 3, Los Angeles 2 in a shutout. Saturday's games, Minnesota at Buffalo, New York Rangers at Philadelphia, Islanders at Calgary, Seattle at Utah, Carolina at New Jersey, Columbus at Pittsburgh, Florida at Washington, Montreal goes to Ottawa, Toronto is at Winnipeg, Boston at Chicago, Edmonton at Vancouver, Los Angeles at Anaheim, and Nashville at Vegas. As for the Sunday games, we have Tampa Bay at Dallas at 2 p.m., Ottawa at Detroit, 5 p.m., and St. Louis at Edmonton at 8 p.m. In the National Basketball Association, Friday's results, Indiana Pacers 127, New Orleans 119. Cleveland 117, Philadelphia 115. Brooklyn 112, Chicago 109. LA Clippers 121, Toronto 117 in overtime. Houston 110, Minnesota 105, Sacramento 128, Washington 115. Saturday's games, Utah at Dallas, Boston at Atlanta, Indiana at Detroit, Phoenix at New York, Minnesota at San Antonio, Oklahoma City at Miami, Charlotte at Golden State, Washington at Denver, LA Lakers at Portland. Sunday's games, Memphis versus Orlando at noon in London, Brooklyn at Chicago at 7 p.m., New Orleans at Houston at 7 p.m., Charlotte at Denver at 8 p.m., Portland at Sacramento at 9, and Toronto at the LA Lakers at 9:30 p.m. Let's take a look also at the college basketball. Friday's score, men's. Providence 93, Creighton 88 in the East. In the Midwest, Ball State 76, Ohio 71. Dayton 78, Loyola Chicago 51, DePaul 80, Marquette 78, Kansas 80, Baylor 62, Kent State 87, Toledo 84. In the Far West, Boise State 79, Colorado State 73. And that was for men's. Let's look at women's scores on Friday. Campbell 61, Northeastern 51 in the East, Monmouth 56, Towson 53, Stony Brook 61, Hofstra 44. In the South, Charleston beat Drexel 74 to 64, Elon 72, UNC Wilmington 62, Hampton 59, William & Mary 49, UTSA 79, Florida Atlantic 42. In the Midwest, Bradley 71, Drake 64, UIC 66, Evansville 44, 48. In the Far West, Hawaii 86, Cal Poly 46. In the NFL today, we have the New England Patriots squaring off against the Houston Texans, and we also have the LA Rams later in the day squaring off against the Chicago Bears. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Buffalo News for today, Sunday, January 18th. We read from the Buffalo News Live on weekday and Sunday mornings at 9 p.m. We rebroadcast at 4 p.m. For more information, call 716-821-5555. That's 716-821-5555. Your reader today has been Ron Bickelman. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the New York Times Magazine. Following that at noon, in place of the USA Today, we have African American Hour from our friends at the Audio Reader Service in Lawrence, Kansas. It's news, information, commentary, and history about the African American community. And at 1 o'clock, we have history from Mind's Eye in St. Louis. This happened today in history, a 1950s heist of the Ancient Stone of Destiny, predictions of 2025 from 1925, the Rockefellers, and a 1754 friendly fire incident. Stay with us. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have